She's already dead to us." The words fell like a knife in the middle of the laughter. My brother's voice cut through the clinking glasses, the soft hum of Christmas songs, the warmth of candles that flickered across the tablecloth. For a moment, nobody breathed. I felt every gaze slide away from me, every fork lower in slow surrender. The scent of cinnamon and pine that had filled the room only seconds ago turned sharp, like smoke after something precious burned. I'm Margaret, 54 years old, and I never imagined hearing those words spoken about my own daughter. My brother's smile was steady, rehearsed. He leaned back in his chair, his arm over the seat of his wife's chair, like he'd delivered a toast instead of a verdict. "You have to move on," he said lightly. "She chose her path. She's gone." Gone. He said it as if she were a mistake that could be erased by consensus. No one corrected him, not one of them. My sister toyed with her napkin, folding the corner over and over. My nephew poured himself more wine. The only sound I could trust was the candle's faint hiss as wax met flame. I looked down at the tablecloth I had ironed that morning, white cotton lined with red embroidery, a ritual I kept for decades. It had seen laughter, fights, forgiveness, but never exile. "She's your niece," I whispered. My voice trembled, not from fear, but disbelief. His eyes stayed cold. "She made herself a stranger." The silence that followed felt heavier than the air itself. I wanted to stand, to shout, but my body stayed still, pinned by shame that wasn't mine to carry. My mind ran backward, to the last morning my daughter had stood at this very table, tracing her fingers along the same stitched pattern, telling me she was tired of being judged for who she loved. I had told her, "Give them time." I believed time softened everything. Now I knew time had sharpened them instead. I caught my reflection in the silver serving tray beside the ham, a woman who'd aged twice in one night. Lines deepened, eyes hollow. The candle beside it wavered, light stretching, shrinking, trying to survive in a room where warmth was dying. My brother's wife reached over and refilled his glass. "Let's not ruin dinner," she said. "It's already ruined," I murmured. He turned toward me, eyes hardening. "You need to accept what's done." "I will never accept erasing her," I said quietly. "Then you'll stay alone in it." Alone. The word echoed. Even the old clock in the hallway seemed to pause between ticks. That's when I felt the weight of every photograph that lined the walls. Family portraits, weddings, graduations, all smiling faces arranged like proof that we belonged. But belonging here now required betrayal. I realized in that moment that I was the only one left still loyal to her name. I lifted my glass, not to toast, but to end the night. "To remembering what's true," I said. Nobody joined me. The scent of pine pressed against my chest, thick and suffocating. I wanted air, but the air was filled with pretense. My hands shook as I gathered my coat. The tablecloth brushed my fingers, its texture familiar and fragile, and I thought about how memory clings, even when people don't. On my way to the door, I heard my brother's voice again, low, almost pitying. "You'll make yourself sick holding on to ghosts." I didn't turn. I simply said, "She's not a ghost. You just stopped looking." Outside, the snow had started to fall, soft, patient, unjudging. It gathered on the porch rail, melting on my skin like forgiveness I hadn't asked for. Through the window, the candlelight flickered inside, bending but refusing to die. The warmth that used to live in that room had turned brittle, but somewhere deep in me, something remained lit. I stood in the quiet street, feeling the cold seep through my gloves. The world smelled of smoke and pine, and every breath stung like truth. I thought of her, my daughter, her laughter, her stubborn light, and I knew then that silence was the soil in which cruelty grows. So I made myself a promise right there, under the falling snow, before the night swallowed the last of the warmth. I promised her name would not fade. He said grief made me unstable. The words came softly, almost kindly, as if wrapped in care. Yet behind them was something sharp enough to draw blood. The fireplace cracked in the background, its rhythm steady and cruel, every pop marking another inch of my reputation burning away. My manager sat across from me, hands folded, face gentle, voice rehearsed. "You've been through a lot, Margaret," he said. "People just worry you might not be yourself lately." I smiled the way a cornered animal smiles. "Who worries exactly?" He hesitated, then reached for the folded letter on his desk. The paper was creased and smudged where his thumb had pressed too hard. "Anonymous feedback," he said. "Just small things. Colleagues mentioning you seem distracted, forgetful." The sound of the fire behind him swallowed my reply. Distracted, forgetful, convenient words when someone wants you dismissed quietly. I had worked there 27 years. I trained most of the people now whispering in corners. But today, my work was being translated into instability, my grief redefined as disorder. I caught the faint hiss of the logs splitting. It became a pulse I couldn't ignore. That sound. Soft destruction masked as warmth. "He's been speaking to people here, hasn't he?" I asked. He blinked. "Who?" "My brother," I said. Silence stretched. He didn't confirm, but his eyes dropped to the desk. That was enough. My brother's shadow reached even here, into this office where I had built my own name long before tragedy entered my home. He had started rewriting me, one rumor at a time. When the meeting ended, he handed me the letter. "Take a few days off," he said. "Just rest." Rest. That word again. The polite form of removal. I folded the paper and slipped it into my coat pocket, the texture dry and thin like trust gone brittle. On my way out, I heard the echo of my own footsteps in the hallway, hollow and deliberate. By the elevator, my colleague Daniel waited. He was younger, sharp-eyed, cautious. "You didn't hear it from me," he whispered. "But there have been emails, copies sent to management, same tone, same phrasing. I can get you one." "What do they say?" "That you're unpredictable, that you might make a scene." I almost laughed. "And that's a crime now?" He looked around before lowering his voice further. "It's signed with fake names, but they're all routed through the same server ID. I'll print a few for you tonight." I nodded. "You're risking a lot." "I just hate watching good people get buried," he said quietly. The elevator doors opened, and as I stepped inside, the sound of the office faded. Phones ringing, keys clacking, laughter that suddenly felt foreign. My reflection stared back at me in the steel wall. My brother's smile flashed in memory. The one he wore when lying was easy for him. He had always known how to sound righteous while doing harm. Now he was rewriting me as fragile, unstable, a woman undone by her own emotions, convenient, defensible, irrefutable if I stayed quiet. That night I sat by my own fireplace. The log snapped, mirroring the one in that office. Same sound, different room. I opened the printed emails Daniel had left in my mailbox, 5 pages, each marked with polite concern. "We fear for her well-being. She might lash out. She's grieving, not thinking clearly. All written as kindness, all meant to destroy. One line struck hardest. She refuses to let go of the past." Maybe they were right about that, because letting go meant letting him win. I pressed my palm against the folded paper, felt the grain bite my skin. The fire's warmth reached my face, but my hands stayed cold. I knew this kind of betrayal didn't end at work. It spread like smoke through every open door. He wanted me small, discredited, erased. But I still had proof. I still had Daniel's courage, and I still had my daughter's memory, something no rumor could unmake. The sound of the fire rose again, a low crack that reminded me of applause, only crueler. I stared into the flame until I saw faces in it. His, mine, hers, all flickering, all trapped. "They think I'll break," I whispered to the empty room. "They don't know how much I've already survived." The fire gave one final pop, scattering a spark across the hearth. I let it fade, slow and quiet, as my heartbeat steadied. Their whispers wore my sanity thin. Every favor became a receipt. The words arrived not in a letter, but in a stack of envelopes, each one neatly labeled, each one carrying the weight of something I never thought would need to be measured. The paper was stiff, the edges sharp, and the texture rasped beneath my fingertips like accusation. Inside, each sheet bore numbers: $4,200 for tuition, $1,150 for rent. Transactions turned into proof of my supposed debt to him. My brother's handwriting filled every margin, precise and emotionless, as though love itself could be itemized. He called it family balance. I called it betrayal with a pen. The cupboard in my kitchen had become a small archive of shame, years of kindness stored in receipts I never asked for. He had always liked control, the quiet kind, the kind that felt like help until the bill arrived. When my husband died, he appeared at my doorstep with sympathy in one hand and a ledger in the other. I didn't see the trap then. I do now. I ran my fingers across the paper grain again, rough against my skin, like guilt that wouldn't fade. Every texture screamed ownership, his version of care measured in dollars. I wanted to tear them all, but I couldn't. Proof is a double-edged thing. You hate it, but you need it. That evening, my neighbor Helen stopped by. She was older, retired, one of those people who noticed everything but rarely judged. "I saw him earlier," she said quietly, setting a chipped mug of tea on my table. "He was talking to the men at the hardware store, said you're drowning in debts you won't admit." I felt heat rise in my chest. "He's rewriting history. He's making sure no one remembers your version," she said. "You always paid your way. I know that." Her voice steadied me, but it also cut deep. My brother's influence wasn't confined to paper. It was spreading like a rumor, dressed as generosity. I opened one envelope at random and stared at the list. Groceries, $83, bus fare, $22, emergency, $150. Every line was marked with neat decimals, and at the bottom, his note. Balance owed, $5,605. I laughed once, quietly, bitterly. He thinks compassion has a subtotal. Helen leaned closer. "Keep these. You'll need them someday." I nodded, slipping the papers into a folder. The cupboard door creaked when I placed it inside, like the house itself disapproved. For years, that cupboard held his gifts: Christmas baskets, birthday cards, photos of family reunions where we smiled through secrets. Now it held proof that those moments had price tags. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the table, the chipped mug cold in my hands, and stared at the pile of envelopes again. I traced the raised ink of his signature. The same hand that once held mine when I was too young to cross the street now kept a record of every crossing I'd made since. The paper felt heavier than paper should. That texture, grainy, unyielding, reminded me how debt doesn't just live in numbers, it lives in silence. He had built a system where kindness could be repossessed. In the quiet, I whispered to no one, "Love shouldn't need a receipt." The fridge hummed faintly, the only sound in the kitchen. My eyes drifted toward the window. Outside, the night was still, the streetlights bleeding through frost. I remembered my daughter's laughter from years ago, echoing through these same walls before all this began. That sound, that joy, it never came with a ledger. When morning came, I gathered all the envelopes into one pile. I tied them with twine, not to destroy them, but to keep them together. Proof, not payment. Helen had been right. There would come a day when I'd need to show the world what love looks like when turned into evidence. I opened the cupboard one last time. The wood was smooth under my hand, but the air inside felt cold. I placed the bundle next to my husband's photo, as if to let him see what his absence had cost. I whispered again, "You can't own kindness," though the words felt hollow against the quiet. Some debts can't be repaid because they were never owed, but he wouldn't understand that. He'd rather believe that every kindness deserved a return, every meal a signature, every ounce of grief a balance sheet. The sunlight through the window fell across the papers, turning the ink a dull gold. For a moment, it almost looked beautiful, until I remembered what it meant. He priced my love like an invoice. I found her birth certificate missing. It was a small lockbox, one she'd painted years ago with streaks of blue and silver, the kind that shimmered when the morning light touched it. Now, the box sat open inside the drawer, empty. The air in the room felt colder, the silence heavier. A faint beam of light cut through the curtains, landing on the wooden floor where dust floated like tiny witnesses. My hands shook as I lifted the lid again, hoping I'd missed something. I hadn't. Her documents were gone. Her birth certificate, her school records, even the hospital form with her infant footprint. All vanished, as though she'd never existed. And that was when I understood. This wasn't loss. This was erasure. I stood frozen for what felt like hours. The key I'd used for years hung still from the lock, useless now. The light flickered across the brass, the same light that once glowed through her bedroom window. I whispered into the empty air, "He's taken her again." Later that morning, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in months. Frank, a retired officer who used to help my husband with paperwork. He answered on the second ring. "You sound shaken," he said. "I am. Something's been stolen." "What kind of something?" "Proof that my daughter existed," I said quietly. "Her lockbox is empty." There was a pause. Then his voice steadied. "Bring me what's left." When I arrived at his small office, the smell of old coffee and ink filled the space. He pulled a notepad toward him and wrote slowly, his handwriting neat and careful. "We'll file a report," he said. "Identity document theft. You'll need to list what's missing." I listed everything I could remember. The birth certificate, the medical note, the social file. He typed each line into the official template, reading them back one by one like he was naming ghosts. "Any idea who'd want them?" he asked. I hesitated. "My brother." Frank stopped typing. "That's a serious claim." "He's already rewritten her story once," I said. "He said she was estranged, gone, even dead to us. Now with those papers gone, he can prove it." He nodded slowly. "Do you have any reason to think he might have accessed this house?" "He has a key," I whispered. "He gave it to himself when I wasn't looking." The printer whirred behind us, spitting out the official form, reference ID 2497B. The black ink gleamed faintly under the light. Frank handed it to me. "Keep this safe. It's proof you reported it. And if his name appears anywhere official, bank, court, or registry, we'll have grounds." I looked down at the bottom of the printed report. A single name caught my eye in one of the attached records. Signature, Guardian, Thomas Gray. My breath stopped. He called himself her guardian. Frank leaned closer, reading the line. "This form's been altered," he said. "See this spacing? It wasn't typed originally. Someone filled it later." He picked up his phone, snapped a picture, and emailed it to himself for evidence. "We'll need this examined," he said. "And Margaret, don't confront him yet. Let's make the system work for once." But I knew my brother. He was too careful, too clean, every move disguised as care, every theft labeled as duty. Now he'd crossed into something colder, possession disguised as family. When I got home, the drawer where the lockbox sat looked different, somehow smaller. Dust motes still floated in the sunlight, drifting like tiny verdicts. I slid the report beside the box, a new artifact replacing the old. The light hit the paper and bounced back, a dull shimmer against the wooden surface. I traced the edge of the document with my fingertip, grounding myself in its texture, rough, slightly raised where the ink thickened. A physical truth. It wasn't much, but it was enough to begin a trail. "He called himself her guardian," I repeated, this time not as grief, but as evidence. The air trembled around the words. I locked the drawer, turned the key, and left it shining in the faint spill of morning light. He left a check on my doorstep. It was resting there beneath the morning frost, the white envelope pressed flat against the iron grate, my name written in his neat, deliberate handwriting. The cold bit my fingers as I picked it up. Inside was a check, $2,000, signed by him, memo line reading, "For peace." The air itself seemed to freeze around that word, peace, written in ink, sold at a price. I stood by the mailbox, breath turning to mist. The paper felt colder than the air, smooth but soulless. I turned it over, once, twice, trying to feel intention through texture. There was none. Just that faint chemical scent of printed ink, the smell of something calculated. I slipped it into my coat pocket, not because I wanted to keep it, but because I didn't want my neighbors to see what peace looked like in this family. Purchased and pre-signed. When I walked back inside, frost traced the corners of the window pane. The glass was fogged over, as if the house itself didn't want to witness this moment. I set the envelope on the table beside my tea, untouched, and stared at it until the ink signature blurred. The silence felt colder than the morning. He knew what that check meant. It wasn't a gift. It was leverage. An hour later, I called Denise, the notary I'd met through the courthouse, a quiet woman who believed in paper trails more than promises. She listened while I explained. "You're saying he left it without warning?" "Yes, like a trap." "Then record the refusal," she said firmly. "Take a photo, log the amount, and send it back. That's a formal boundary." "What happens if he says I accepted it?" "Then your record speaks louder. It's not just about the check, it's about the paper behind it." Her tone reminded me of something my husband used to say, "Documentation is armor." I wrote that phrase down in the margin of my notebook, next to the words, "access limit." That's what this was, drawing a line, not just emotionally, but legally. By noon, I was standing at the post office, pen in hand. The clerk barely looked up as I slid the envelope across the counter. I had written his address carefully, deliberately, the same way he had written mine. My fingers hesitated before sealing the flap. "Return to sender," I whispered, and pressed it closed. When I stepped back outside, the cold hit harder, a clean kind of ache that stung the lungs. The street was quiet, the sky a dull gray. In that stillness, I felt something I hadn't in months. Control. Small, fragile, but real. By evening, my phone buzzed. His name flashed on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "So you sent it back?" His voice was smooth, practiced. "Yes. You'd rather fight than move on?" "I'd rather not be bought." He chuckled softly. "You're making this ugly, you know." "It already was ugly," I said. A pause followed. I could hear the faint hum of his heater through the line. Then his tone shifted, lower, colder. "If you want to break this family apart, don't blame me when people take sides." My hand trembled, but my voice didn't. "I'm not breaking it. I'm just refusing to be owned." He hung up without another word. The house settled into quiet again. The frost outside thickened over the window, softening the world into pale blur. I made tea and watched the steam curl upward, faint warmth against the chill. For the first time I realized silence could be a form of procedure, a record in its own way. Every unanswered call, every returned envelope, it was all evidence. Before going to bed, I wrote in my journal, "Boundary drawn, peace denied, integrity intact." I didn't sleep easily. Dreams came in fragments, doors closing, glass shattering, my brother's voice echoing through empty halls. But when I woke, the world felt sharper, cleaner. There was a new kind of clarity in the cold. I walked to the window, traced a circle in the frost with my fingertip, and looked out toward the mailbox where it had all begun. The snow was undisturbed, pure, untouched. Peace came stamped with his name. They buried her without me. The sound of church bells reached me before the message did, slow, deliberate tolls drifting through the cold morning air. I was standing by the kitchen window when my phone vibrated, a single text from my neighbor, Helen. "It's starting." Attached was a photo. My breath caught. There it was, the funeral program. Her name printed neatly beneath the headline, "A Life Remembered." But the word underneath it, in italics, made my stomach twist. Estranged. I hadn't been invited. They buried my daughter without her mother present. The scent of lilies had already begun to creep through the neighborhood. It was faint, but unmistakable, that sweet, overripe fragrance that clings to sorrow. I could almost see them lining the pews, white and pure, disguising rot beneath their petals. My brother must have chosen them. He always liked things that looked innocent, while they deceived. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. Then I grabbed my coat and walked out into the chill. The street was quiet, the kind of Sunday silence that carries judgment. I walked past parked cars, hearing only the echo of those bells. The church was less than 10 minutes away, but I didn't go inside. I stopped across the street, hidden behind the iron fence. Through the stained glass, I could see flickers of color, the reflection of light moving across people who pretended to grieve. I could hear him too, faintly, his voice carrying the familiar rhythm of authority. "My brother. We are gathered here," he said, "to honor a life lost too soon, a life that chose distance, but never left our hearts." Lies dressed as compassion. A hand touched my arm. It was Helen, her eyes wet. "They said you didn't want to come." "That's what he told them?" She nodded. "He said you asked for privacy." I almost laughed. He's rewriting even this. Inside, the choir began to sing, a hymn I'd taught my daughter when she was 5. The sound turned the air brittle. I looked up at the church doors, closed, heavy, unmoving. For the first time in my life, faith felt like a locked room I couldn't enter. When the service ended, the crowd filed out. I stayed where I was, still behind the fence. They carried flowers and folded programs, faces softened with performative grief. My brother stood among them, shaking hands, offering thanks. He looked content, his narrative complete. He had taken her death and made it holy, but only on his terms. Helen whispered, "You should at least see the grave." We walked together to the cemetery behind the church, fresh soil, a simple gravestone, a wilted rose already drooping in the cold. Her name again, correct spelling, wrong truth. No mention of family, just a date and a single line. She found peace. Peace, the same word that haunted me from that check he'd left. Always peace, always on his terms. I knelt, pressed my gloved hand to the dirt. The ground was damp, and the scent of lilies followed me here too, as if mockery had its own perfume. Beneath it, though, was something sharper, the smell of wet soil and stone, reality unvarnished. I whispered to the ground, "They can erase me from the program, but not from you." Helen placed her hand on my shoulder. "You should file a complaint," she said softly. "There's a form for this, for forged service authorizations. If his name's on it, it'll show." That night, I did exactly that. The diocesan office was cold and bureaucratic, walls lined with plaques and framed prayers. I filled out the report carefully. 3 pages, each question a reminder of how institutions hide behind politeness. When I handed it over, the secretary read the note aloud. "Guardian authorization, Thomas Gray." Then she looked up at me. "Is that your brother?" "Yes," I said. "He claimed authority he doesn't have." She hesitated before stamping the top of the form. "We'll review it," she said, "but it may take time." "I've already lost enough time," I told her. "Just make sure the record exists." Back home, the lilies I'd brought from the service lay in the sink. I couldn't bear their smell anymore. I turned on the tap, watched the water drown them, their petals folding inward like secrets collapsing. The air cleared slowly. Outside, the bells started again. Shorter, fainter this time. I stood by the window until the sound faded. The frost on the glass caught the dim streetlight, turning the world ghostly. Somewhere out there, he was probably congratulating himself for doing the right thing, believing even God was on his side. But faith, I've learned, isn't built on ceremonies. It's built on truth. And truth, once unearthed, can't be reburied. Even God's house took his word. A stranger asked for my late daughter's account PIN. The call came just as the sun was fading, when the house was quiet enough for the smallest sound to feel loud. The phone rang twice before I answered. The voice on the other end was polite, distant, rehearsed. "Ma'am, we're verifying authorization for withdrawals from your daughter's account. Could you confirm her PIN?" For a heartbeat, I couldn't speak. My hand tightened around the receiver until it ached. "My daughter's account?" I said slowly. "She's been gone for over a year." The voice didn't falter. "We have recent activity," he said. "Multiple transactions. We just need to confirm security details." The word activity hit like a slap. I could hear faint tapping, keyboard clicks, paper shuffling, each sound small, methodical. My pulse thudded in my ears, syncing with every noise on the line. "Who requested access?" I asked. "I'm not authorized to say," the man replied, "but the system shows family-level clearance." Family level. The same word my brother had used in his forged signatures, his letters, his control. I hung up without another word. The ringing didn't stop. It echoed through my mind long after the call ended, a phantom sound that wouldn't die down. I sat at the table, staring at the small plastic card still tucked inside a folder labeled "Her File." My hands trembled as I dialed the bank's official number. A woman answered this time. Her voice was careful, deliberate, someone trained to keep calm when others can't. I explained everything. She paused halfway through. "Wait," she said, her tone shifting. "There were withdrawals recorded this month, 4 in total, $2,000, $1,150, $3,100, and $6,850. That's $13,700 total." My stomach turned. "Those aren't mine," I said. "They can't be." "I believe you," she replied. Each withdrawal came from different branches, all authorized by a power of attorney note. The signature on file— She hesitated. "It's the same as the Guardian record we flagged last week." My throat closed. "Thomas Gray." She didn't answer, but the silence was confirmation enough. "Can you stop him?" I asked. "We've frozen the account," she said softly. "And I'm marking the file for fraud. You'll receive a reference entry in the morning. Keep it safe. If he tries again, it'll show on record." When I hung up, the quiet felt hostile. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed louder, the house breathing around me in uneasy rhythm. I looked at the phone on the counter, its small red light blinking, waiting, as if it knew the next call would bring something worse. The smell of burnt dust from the heater filled the air, heavy and metallic. Every sense sharpened under the weight of anger. He'd done it again, turned her absence into profit. He'd stolen her name, her peace, and now her money. I went to my desk and pulled out the notebook where I'd started documenting every incident, every forged signature, every unauthorized claim. The pages were thick with evidence now, each date underlined in red. Beside it, I placed the card, the same one she'd used at the grocery store when she was 17, back when she still believed family meant safety. I whispered into the stillness, "He spent her silence in dollars." Later that night, I called my ally at the bank, the same woman who'd filed the report. "We'll open a fraud investigation," she said, "but it won't be easy. He used institutional codes. It looks like he had inside access." "Then we'll pull every record until something breaks," I said. She paused. "That kind of determination can get you noticed." "I'm already noticed," I said quietly, "just not the way I deserve." The air around me felt colder. I could hear the faint ticking of the kitchen clock, each second slicing through the silence like judgment. I'd never cared about money. I cared about meaning. But meaning was what he'd been stealing all along, transforming memory into numbers, affection into transactions, love into debt. When I turned off the lights, the phone glowed faintly in the dark. I left it on the counter, a symbol now, of intrusion, of warning. I lay awake listening, waiting for it to ring again, because I knew it would. and next time I'd be ready. He spent her silence in dollars. Complaints became my daily prayers. Every morning, before the kettle even whistled, I sat at the kitchen table with another form. The light from the window struck the stack of folders, making the ink gleam like quiet defiance. Each page carried its own rhythm, the grain of the paper against my fingertips, the small resistance before the pen met the surface. The sound had become sacred to me, the scrape, the sigh, the stamp. It was my liturgy of persistence. I'd stopped writing letters for love. Now I wrote for proof. 3 acknowledgments had arrived this week alone, thin envelopes stamped in blue, each one a small victory. My protector ally brought them over personally, her gloves dusted with winter's chill. She placed them on the table like offerings. "They've logged your submissions," she said. "The municipal clerk confirmed the 3rd one. It's in the record now." "And the earlier ones?" I asked. "Processing," she replied. "But your name's on every reference. They can't erase that." The phrase stayed with me. They can't erase that. It rolled through my head as I pressed the next stamp down on a new form. The red seal bled slightly into the fibers, leaving a faint halo around the date. My fingers brushed the worn edge of the folder, the texture both familiar and grounding. This folder had lived longer than trust itself. He'd started spreading rumors again. Word reached me through the neighbor, whispers about how I'd lost perspective, how grief had made me obsessive. "He says you're fixated," she admitted awkwardly. I almost laughed. "Fixation builds nations," I said. "It also wins court cases." When the kettle finally whistled, I poured tea over the day's paperwork, careful not to spill a drop. The steam rose like a small fog over the ink, softening the air. My ally took a sip of her own, watching me work. "You know," she said gently, "he'll fight harder now that the record's public." "I expect nothing less," I replied. "Let him fight the paper. It doesn't lie." Outside, snow fell in thin, slanted lines. The world looked sterilized, orderly, almost bureaucratic. I found comfort in that symmetry. Each flake was a document of its own, unique but accountable to gravity. I thought of how my brother must feel, knowing I'd turned his quiet manipulations into official entries. There was no erasing ink, no rewriting signatures once they touched government seals. At noon, I walked to the courthouse to file the next notice myself. The clerk, a thin man with ink stains on his cuffs, nodded as I handed him the folder. "Ah, you again," he said. "You're building quite the archive." "I'm building history," I corrected softly. He smiled, stamping the page with practiced force. "Consider it recorded." The sound of that stamp, clean, final, decisive, was music. I wanted to hold it in the air a moment longer. On the walk home, I imagined every rumor he'd ever spread crumbling under the weight of the official record. He might own the story, whispered at the church or around family dinners, but I was authoring the one that would survive. Later that evening, I opened the folder again. The pages were slightly curled from handling, corners dog-eared, edges rubbed soft like cloth. The paper no longer felt fragile. It felt fortified, a boundary made visible. I traced the stamp with my thumb, the raised ink dry but still warm from friction. I thought of the first form I'd ever filed, the shaking hands, the doubt, the fear that I'd look foolish for believing truth could live inside bureaucracy. Now those fears had hardened into discipline. The system might be slow, but it was unmovable once you knew where to press. At dusk, my phone buzzed again, a message from my protector ally. "All 3 notices now in official registry, case number assigned." I exhaled, the first real breath of the day. Beneath the exhaustion was something new, structure, a shape to the chaos. I gathered the papers, placed them neatly in the drawer beside the teacup, and locked it. The key clicked softly, like punctuation at the end of a confession. The house was silent, except for the faint rustle of the folder settling. Paper began to sound like armor. I found his voice saying what I always knew. The file arrived at dusk, buried in a forwarded message from my ally. No subject line, no explanation, just an audio attachment with a name I didn't recognize. My finger hovered over the play icon. For a moment I hesitated. Then the sound cracked through the speaker like static pulled from a storm. At first, only fragments. Breathing, a shuffle, the dull echo of a room too empty to hold secrets. Then came his voice. My brother's, grainy, agitated, unmistakably his. "She's gone," he said. "That makes her money ours." The sentence hung in the air like smoke. I stopped breathing. It wasn't the words that killed me. It was the certainty behind them. He wasn't grieving. He was calculating. I replayed it, twice, 3 times. The hiss of the old recorder filled the silence between his pauses, a reminder that truth sometimes arrives damaged, but still alive. I could hear faint background noise, too. The rhythmic hum of a heater, the click of a lighter, maybe even the rustle of papers. Each sound mapped the moment he confessed without realizing it. My witness ally, calm as always, called right after I listened. "You heard it?" she asked. "Yes. And you're sure it's his?" "Every syllable," I whispered. "Every sigh." "Then it's admissible," she said. "We'll log it as digital proof. I already filed the chain of custody form. It's solid." Her voice steadied me, though my hands still shook. I set the cracked phone on the table, the screen flickering, a thin line of light slicing across his frozen waveform. The blinking notification light pulsed like a heartbeat, proof that the device still lived, and with it, the truth. When I sent the file to the court's digital evidence address, the confirmation email came back within seconds. Reference entry 91A04. Just text, no emotion. Yet it felt monumental. Years of denial distilled into one timestamp. Later, I sat in the dark, replaying the recording again, not to hurt myself, but to memorize the sound of deceit exposed. "She's gone. That makes her money ours." It was casual to him, as if saying the weather had turned. I whispered to the empty room, "No, it never was yours." The next morning, I brought the phone to the courthouse for verification. The clerk handled it delicately, as though touching something radioactive. "We'll extract and certify," he said. "The file will stay sealed, but it's logged under digital evidence." "What happens next?" I asked. He looked at me, tired but kind. "Next, the truth has to speak louder than the rumor." When I stepped outside, the sky was pale with winter sun. The air smelled faintly of rain and static, the same scent that always follows confession. For the first time, I didn't feel small in the face of his power. I felt anchored. Back home, I placed the phone on the mantel beside my daughter's photo. The cracked glass reflected her faintly, as though she were looking back through the evidence itself. The blinking light continued, slow and steady. Proof doesn't rest. It waits. That night, as I lay awake, I could still hear his voice echoing in my mind. Only now, it no longer had authority. It had consequence. His voice signed his own downfall. He laughed when the envelope arrived. The sound was sharp, careless, a laugh that didn't belong in the same room as justice. The sunlight from the window struck the envelope on the table, catching the red wax seal until it gleamed like a warning. I watched him tap it with his finger, amused, as though the law itself were an old acquaintance that wouldn't dare knock too hard. He said, "You really think a piece of paper can undo blood?" I didn't answer. The silence between us felt older than the argument. The seal was embossed with the courthouse insignia, clean, deliberate, final. I'd seen enough of them lately to know the feel of authority in texture alone. The edges were thick, smooth beneath my thumb. Even the paper carried weight. When I'd first opened it, sunlight had poured across the kitchen table, and for a moment, it looked almost holy. That light, sharp, white, certain, became my anchor for the day. My arbiter ally, a clerk from the courthouse, had called earlier. "He signed the acknowledgement," she said. "It's official now. His denial's off the record." I let the words settle like dust on steel. "Then the clock has started." "Yes," she replied quietly. "You'll want to have your exhibits in order by Thursday. They've scheduled the preliminary hearing." I looked over at the folder on the counter, the one I'd kept sealed since the voice memo arrived. Inside were the proofs: the recording, the bank statements, the forged authorizations. The folder had grown heavier with every page, as if truth carried literal weight. When I touched it, the surface felt cool and slick. He poured himself coffee, unbothered. "You've forgotten how small this town is," he said. "You think the judge doesn't know who I am?" "That's exactly why I trust the record," I said. For a moment, his expression faltered, just a flicker of uncertainty, but he hid it behind a smirk. "Family settles things privately," he said. "Family destroyed things privately," I answered. The words landed harder than I expected. He set down his cup, the porcelain clinking against the table. "You'd really drag this through court?" "I'm not dragging anything," I said softly. "It's already there." That night, I ironed the copy of the summons flat and slipped it into the binder. Beneath the lamplight, the wax shimmered faintly red, a small sun sealed inside paper. I thought about all the years he'd hidden behind charm and bloodlines, how often people excused his lies because they shared his name. But the law didn't share names. It shared evidence. At dawn, I stood on the courthouse steps with my ally. The stone beneath our feet was cold, slick with dew. People passed in murmurs, their coats pulled tight against the wind. The courthouse doors loomed heavy ahead, framed by light that cut through the morning haze. "You're early," she said, smiling gently. "I've waited years," I replied. We went through security, the metal detector humming low. Inside, everything smelled of paper and polish, the scent of process, of order. The walls held echoes of past reckonings. In that space, rumor meant nothing. Only records spoke. As we filed the submission, I noticed the clerk stamping the receipt, the same motion I'd once made at home in defiance. Only this time, it was formal, institutional. The sound echoed, a crisp, hollow thud that traveled farther than it should have. I signed the affidavit, my hand steady. The arbiter leaned closer and whispered, "Once it's logged, it can't be retracted." "I don't want it retracted," I said. "I want it remembered." When we stepped back outside, the light hit the courthouse seal again. Bright, clean, merciless. He was still somewhere behind those walls, probably laughing again, still believing his charm could outtalk the law. But this time, the story wasn't his to tell. He still thought family outranked law. They said my daughter's name aloud in court. For a moment, the world stopped breathing. The sound of her name, clear, official, undeniable, cut through the echo of the courtroom like sunlight piercing a closed room. Every seat was filled. The air was dense with waiting. Faces I half recognized from church and market stared forward, their silence a collective verdict. The weight of that silence pressed against my ribs, steadier than fear, sharper than pride. I took the stand when they called me. The bench was colder than I imagined, the wood smooth beneath my palms. I swore on the Bible, its cover worn, its pages thin with history. The judge nodded once, formal and grave. My protector ally stood just behind the rail, her hands folded, eyes locked on me, a quiet anchor amid the murmur of strangers. They began with formality, dates, transactions, case references. The clerk read them like scripture. Case number 4832B, State versus... The rest blurred. All I heard was her name again, my daughter's, fixed forever into the record. I swallowed hard and began to speak. "He took what was hers," I said, "and then he called it family business." Gasps moved through the gallery like a slow wave. I didn't look at him, but I felt the heat of his stare, defiant, smirking still. He'd worn the same expression at the funeral, at the reading of the will, every time truth threatened to climb out of the ground. The judge leaned forward. "Continue," she said. So I did. I unfolded the story piece by piece, the voice memo, the forged checks, the withdrawals. The paper rustled softly in my hand, and for a moment the light above caught the edge of the document, turning it translucent. The truth almost looked fragile under that glare, but it held. He moved $6,850 the week after her death, I said. He signed my name on 2 forms, each dated 2 days apart. He claimed it was reconciliation money. It wasn't. It was theft. The clerk typed quickly, the rhythmic tapping filling the room. Somewhere behind me, someone whispered, "Shameful." I paused. "I have the records," I continued. "Filed under reference 4832B, financial evidence log, verified by the bank." The judge nodded again. "Entered into record," she said. My protector ally stepped forward with the binder, setting it on the bench. The faint creak of leather broke the tension. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "this aligns with the earlier voice submission." He shifted in his seat. I heard the small scrape of his shoe against the tile, a restless defiance that no longer carried weight. The light above him glared off his watch, the same one he'd worn to every holiday dinner, a symbol of timing, of patience, of his belief that I'd never stand here. But timing had turned against him. The defense tried to interrupt, muttering something about grief clouding judgment, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. "Let her finish." So I spoke the final piece. "He said my daughter's name only once," I told them, "and it was to justify taking what she left behind. He said, 'She's gone. It's ours now.'" Gasps again. A woman in the back row covered her mouth. The judge exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing, not disbelief, but recognition. The court stenographer's keys kept clattering, trapping each word into permanence. For the first time, I felt the balance shift, not through revenge but through visibility. Every lie that once lived in shadow now sat in official light. That was the cost he'd never calculated: daylight itself. When my testimony ended, I sat back and folded my hands. The Bible lay open before me, its pages trembling slightly under the hum of the ceiling fan. The smell of paper, polish, and faint dust filled the air. It wasn't peace yet, but it was proof. My protector leaned close and whispered, "It's on record now. They can't take it back." I nodded. Outside the window, sunlight flooded the hallway tiles, a clean, merciless light that erased every shadow between us. Her name finally lived in daylight. He denied every document until the totals spoke. The courtroom air felt heavier than stone. I spread the ledgers across the polished table, the paper edges brushing against my skin like thin blades of truth. The ink shimmered faintly under the fluorescent light. Rows of numbers that no amount of denial could erase. His laughter from the earlier sessions had died out days ago, replaced by a brittle stillness. Each ledger had its own story, its own wound. "These were drawn from her account," I said quietly, tracing one column with my finger. $4,002 here, $1,050 there, 2 more withdrawals, $2,000, and $6,850. The judge leaned forward, the pen in her hand stilled. "That's $14,200 in total," I added, the sum ringing out like a final bell. The witness ally adjusted her glasses, flipping through each page, her voice even. "Verified by bank record and signature match." She paused, looked up, "all tied to his authorization." He scoffed under his breath. "You're twisting numbers." "No," I replied. "I'm untangling them." A ripple went through the courtroom. It wasn't outrage, just realization, heavy and collective. The kind of sound that happens when truth finds oxygen. The prosecutor slid one more document forward, a statement log, dated and signed. I could see his name there, bold and certain, the ink slightly smudged where he must have pressed too hard. The texture of the page steadied me. It was rough around the edges, like something retrieved from a fire. I thought of all the nights I'd spent photocopying receipts, matching dates, building a timeline no one could contest. Proof had become my language when words failed. The judge cleared her throat. "Defendant, do you contest these entries?" He leaned back, crossing his arms. "Those accounts were shared. Family funds. She knows that." I looked straight ahead. "They were not shared," I said. "They were stolen." He slammed his hand on the table. "Watch yourself." The judge raised a brow. You'll watch her continue. I took a slow breath. He didn't just take money, I said, voice steady. He took her name and turned it into a transaction. The audience shifted again. Someone whispered, God help him. My witness ally passed me the final exhibit, a bank email printed on plain white paper. The date was bold, the line item clear. The signature, his, unmistakable. I handed it to the clerk. The sound of her stamp echoed through the hall, a heavy official rhythm. Proof received. Filed for record. He leaned forward now, eyes narrowing. You think this changes anything? I met his stare. It changes everything. The judge nodded slowly. The totals speak for themselves. Her gavel didn't fall, not yet, but the words were enough. As I gathered the papers, I could feel the faint indentations his pen had left across the pages, pressure marks from falsehoods signed with confidence. I traced one with my thumb and whispered to myself, pressure always leaves evidence. When the session adjourned, people rose in near silence. No applause, no noise, just the quiet hum of reckoning. My ally touched my shoulder. It's shifting, she said softly. They believe you now. Outside the courthouse, the cold air met me like an old friend. I held the folder tight against my chest. The paper still carried warmth from my hands. It was strange how something so fragile could feel like armor. For the first time in years, he had nothing left to say. His words, his smirk, his confidence, all gone. Only the echo of numbers remained, printed in permanent ink, weighted by consequence. The silence after the totals was judgment enough. They called it restitution. I called it peace. The gavel hadn't fallen yet, but the air already carried its weight. The courtroom held its breath. Rows of quiet faces, waiting. Morning light streamed through the high windows, fracturing against the polished floor, and for a moment it looked like the room itself was split between judgment and grace. He sat across from me, chin lifted, defiance clinging to him like perfume that had lost its sweetness. His lawyer whispered something in his ear, but he didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was the same as it had always been, control disguised as calm. The judge began reading. Her voice was even, almost merciful. Restitution in the amount of $14,200 to be paid in full within 90 days. All false claims nullified. Numbers. Cold, exact, inarguable. They didn't sound like healing, but they sounded like truth. And that was enough. My arbiter ally glanced toward me, eyes steady. It's over, she whispered. I didn't answer, not yet. Because endings never sound like you imagine. They come quietly, almost shy, like dawn after too many sleepless nights. The gavel struck once, wood against wood, sharp, final. The sound echoed through the courtroom and lingered just long enough to feel sacred. A soft murmur rippled through the gallery, not applause, not triumph, just a collective exhale of acknowledgement. He didn't move at first, then his jaw tightened. The arrogance slipped, leaving only something small and human underneath. You think this fixes anything? He muttered. No, I said, but it stops the bleeding. The clerk handed me a copy of the judgment order, thick paper, embossed seal, black ink pressed deep. When I touched it, it was still warm from the machine. The light from the nearest window cut across its surface, and I saw the reflection of my own hand trembling, not from fear, but release. Outside, church bells began to ring in the distance. It was noon. The sound floated through the glass, mixing with the hum of footsteps and shifting benches. The same bells had rung the day of the funeral, but this time, the tone was different, clearer, brighter. I remembered the first time I'd walked into that courthouse, clutching folders like shields, every word of his power echoing in my head. I'd been terrified then, terrified that the truth wouldn't be enough. But today, truth had spoken in numbers, in signatures, in daylight itself. The judge stood, gathering her notes. Court adjourned, she said. Simple words, monumental meaning. He rose too, but slower. His eyes met mine for one last moment. No apology, no remorse, just recognition, the quiet admission that he had finally lost the one thing he thought untouchable: control. My ally touched my arm. "You can breathe now," she said softly. I turned toward the window. The sunlight was fierce now, cutting through the glass in bright, deliberate lines. Dust motes drifted in it, tiny, aimless, free. For the first time in years, I let myself believe in peace, not as forgiveness, but as stillness. Outside the courthouse doors, the crowd thinned. Reporters scribbled. Someone snapped a photograph. But I didn't stop to pose. I didn't need witnesses anymore. The record held everything. I paused on the top step, the city alive around me. The light felt warmer here, honest. I could smell rain on the horizon, faint but coming. Behind me, the courtroom doors closed with a hollow thud. Wood against wood again. So familiar, so final. Peace sounded like wood against wood. I replaced every key in silence. The sound of metal against metal was soft, almost tender. The turning of a screwdriver, the click of a latch being reborn. Morning light slid across the hallway floor as I worked, dust shimmering where the air shifted. For the first time in months, I wasn't securing against someone. I was restoring for myself. Each new lock came from a plain brown box, labeled and numbered. The protector ally stood beside me, tightening the final bolt. "You sure you want to do all of them?" she asked gently. "Yes," I said. "Every one." I wasn't running from ghosts anymore. I was escorting them out. The old brass keys lay in a bowl by the door, dull, scarred, useless. I thought about how many hands had held them. His, hers, mine. How many lies had passed through those same locks pretending to be safety. When the final key turned cleanly, I felt it in my palm. Control. Not vengeance, not victory, just quiet ownership of the walls that still stood. We moved through the house together, testing doors, checking windows. The faint scrape of the latch echoed through the empty rooms, a rhythm of closure. I stopped at the living room mantel. Her photo, my daughter's, sat there again, not hidden in a drawer, not guarded by guilt, just there. "She'd like this light," my ally said softly. "I think she would." The photo had been taken on a spring morning. She'd been laughing at something small, a bird stealing breadcrumbs from the porch. I used to hear that laughter in the house sometimes, like a ghost too kind to leave. But now, in the stillness, I realized it had never been haunting me. It had been waiting for permission to return. The protector sealed the final lock. "You know," she said, "most people don't change everything at once. I'm not most people anymore." She smiled, wiped her hands on a cloth, and left the receipt on the table. I ran my fingers over the ink, smooth thermal paper, faintly warm from the machine. The texture reminded me of something new, yet already mine. Proof, not of ownership, but of reclaiming what couldn't be taken twice. Outside, the afternoon wind picked up. The branches tapped softly against the windows, as if testing the edges of the new security. The sound didn't scare me. It reminded me of breath, measured, continuous, alive. I walked through each room once more. The walls no longer carried the echoes of arguments or the tremor of accusation. They just held space. My daughter's books still lined the shelf. Her scarf hung behind the door. I didn't move them. Some things weren't meant to be replaced, only respected. I opened the front door wide, just to see the street again. Neighbors passed by, unaware that a battle had ended here. The light spilled across the threshold, warm and steady. I stood in it until I could feel its weight settle on my shoulders like forgiveness. Then I closed the door, slowly, deliberately. The new key turned once, smooth and certain. This time, the silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The door finally stayed mine. I wrote to her every Sunday. The letters began as a habit, then turned into a ritual. Sunday mornings, before the church bells rang, I'd sit at the small oak desk by the window and write to her. My hands always hesitated on the first line. How do you address someone who's both gone and everywhere? The faint scent of ink always filled the air first. It mixed with the soft sweetness of old paper, something between memory and dust. I'd press the nib of the pen against the first page, watching the words bloom slowly. Dear Anna. Then silence, then breath, then everything else. I wrote about the weather, about the way the roses finally bloomed again in the garden she planted, about the neighbor's new dog who barked at shadows. I wrote about the trial, though not in detail, just enough to tell her that truth had been spoken and peace had answered back. The witness ally who helped archive the letters once asked softly, "Why write if you never send them?" "Because sending isn't the point," I said. "Writing is." Each envelope was sealed carefully, dated in small, neat handwriting, April 5th, May 12th, June 2nd, 63 in total. I kept them tied in twine, stacked in a wooden box lined with blue cloth. Proof of persistence, not communication. Sometimes, when the evenings felt too still, I'd untie the bundle and read a few lines aloud. My voice would tremble halfway through, and yet, by the end, it always steadied. There was something about seeing her name in my own handwriting that made her feel less distant. The witness came by again one afternoon, holding a letter from the top of the stack. "Would you allow me to include one in the exhibit?" she asked, "for the memorial event?" I hesitated. The idea of strangers reading my private words felt like walking barefoot across memory. But then I thought of what my daughter would have said. She believed in truth shared out loud. "Read it," I told her. "If it helps someone else find peace, let it live beyond me." She opened the envelope carefully, unfolding the paper as though it were a relic. Her voice carried through the room, quiet but certain. "I don't write to keep you alive, my love. I write so I remember how to speak softly again." The words lingered. The air in the room changed. I closed my eyes and imagined her laughing somewhere just beyond sound. After that day, I began placing a single fresh page on the desk each Sunday. But I didn't write immediately. Sometimes I just sat there, breathing in the faint scent of ink, waiting for the words to arrive when they were ready. Healing, I realized, doesn't arrive like thunder. It comes in small gestures, folded pages, sealed envelopes, a name whispered into quiet air. Weeks later, at the exhibit, people stood before the display of letters in silence. Some cried, some smiled. The witness told me afterward, "They said your words felt like something they'd been waiting to hear." I nodded. Then maybe she heard them too. The scent of ink clung to my hands as I left the hall that evening, the same way it always did after I finished a letter. The sun had set by then, but a soft glow still clung to the sky, a kind of half-light that didn't belong to day or night. Her absence began to sound like grace. This year, the candle burned steady. The table was smaller now, or maybe the room had grown larger with time. Either way, there was more space to breathe. The tablecloth, once torn during that final argument, lay smooth across the wood, its seams barely visible. I'd stitched it myself last spring, thread by thread, until the tear disappeared into the pattern. New hands set the plates this year. The laughter came from corners that used to echo. My protector ally stood at the far end, helping the younger ones place candles evenly along the edge. "Looks different," she said softly. "Feels different," I replied. The air carried that familiar scent of pine and cinnamon, the same as every Christmas before, but the heaviness was gone. The flicker of the candles played across the silverware, gentle and sure. For years, light had trembled here, as if afraid to reveal what had happened within these walls. Now, it held steady. The photograph sat at the center of the table, a simple frame, no glass, no inscription. Her smile belonged to a time untouched by betrayal. I didn't cry this time when I looked at it. I just breathed. The candle beside it glowed softly, its reflection catching on the photo's surface like a quiet pulse. One of the younger guests leaned forward. "Who's she?" I smiled. "Someone who taught us what not to hide." The room went quiet for a beat, not in sadness, but in understanding. Even the silence felt changed. No longer sharp, just full. We said grace, simple and brief. No apologies, no empty promises, just gratitude. For survival, for truth, for the kind of peace that doesn't arrive loud, but settles in layers. "She'd like this," my ally whispered beside me. "She would," I said. "She always wanted warmth to win." Outside, snow began to fall. The window caught the reflection of the candlelight, scattering it like stars. I thought about the words once thrown across this same table, those venomous words that had broken us. "She's already dead to us." The memory of that night used to haunt me, but tonight I whispered them again, changed, reborn. "She's already alive in us." The words didn't hurt this time. They healed. The sentence had turned back on itself, becoming something whole. We passed the dishes, the laughter louder now. My hands no longer shook when I reached for the glass. There was no tension in my chest when I looked at the faces around me. New, kind, curious. The ghosts had stepped aside to make room for the living. The protector looked toward me again. "So, it's done?" "Not done," I said quietly. "Just different." A soft hum filled the room. Conversation, the clink of cutlery, a distant song from the radio. Life had found its rhythm again, gentle and unafraid. When the plates were cleared, I stayed a moment longer, tracing my fingers along the mended seam of the tablecloth. The fabric was warm beneath my hand, lit by the soft glow of the remaining candle, proof that what was once torn could still hold beauty. The last guests left near midnight. The air was cool, the floor creaked under quiet steps. I blew out the extra candles one by one until only the center flame remained, the one beside her photograph. I watched it for a while, its light unwavering, reflected in the glass like a heartbeat. For years I had feared that silence meant loss. Now I understood. It could mean peace too. Light stayed where silence used to be.